I have told this story exactly twice. Once to a review board that didn't believe me, and once to my daughter, who did. This is the third time, and the last. I was a boarding officer aboard the TFS Thistlewood, a cruciform cathedral ship built for the slow work of first encounters. Diplomats, escorts, a marine detachment whose job was mostly standing still and looking capable of violence without ever needing to prove it. We had been in the Hollow Veil Nebula 11 days, holding position at the edge of a debris-thinned region the charts called nothing, and the locals, we would learn, called the threshold. The species waiting for us called themselves the Ashen Choir. We had 2 weeks of intercepted liturgy before we ever saw one of them. Chant structures, mathematically precise, repeating across every frequency we monitored. Commands linguists said it wasn't a language so much as a verdict, delivered on a loop, waiting for someone to answer it. We answered. The choir did not send ships to meet us. They sent a single vessel, narrow and pale as bone, that matched our course without ever appearing to accelerate. Captain Oyeleran took the call from her own chair, calm in the particular way she got when she didn't trust a situation enough to relax. The voice that came back wasn't translated so much as it arrived already in English, fully formed, like it had been waiting in the language for years. It told us that first contact required a rite, one representative, sent alone, unarmed, into a chamber aboard their vessel. The representative would be measured. Nothing more was promised. Nothing less was negotiable. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the honest version is less flattering than the one I gave the review board. I felt a flat, cold reluctance, the kind that has nothing to do with courage and everything to do with the math of bad odds. I volunteered anyway, because volunteering was the job, and because the alternative was sending someone younger. Oyeleran argued with me for 11 minutes. I remember the number because I counted it. The way you count things when you're trying not to think about what comes after. She wanted to send a volunteer with no family, no one waiting at the far end of a comm channel for a message that might never come. I told her every name on this ship belonged to someone, and that picking the loneliest man aboard wasn't strategy, it was just a tidier kind of cruelty. She didn't like the answer. She accepted it anyway, because that was the kind of captain she was. She'd argue you to the edge of a decision, and then trust you to walk the rest of it yourself. Our diplomatic attaché, a quiet, precise man named Coel Varen, spent that last hour briefing me on everything 14 days of intercepted liturgy had suggested about the choir's psychology. Their obsession with thresholds, their habit of measuring worth in what a thing endured, rather than what it produced. The total absence, in all that chant, of any reference to weapons, conquest, or fear of us. He told me, almost as an afterthought, that he didn't think they meant us harm. He thought they meant us a test, which from where I was sitting felt like a meaningless distinction. In the end, she signed off because the choir's pale ship had begun, very slowly, to drift away from us, and drifting away was its own kind of answer. They took me across in a shuttle barely large enough for one. No restraints, no scans, no questions. The chamber they put me in was a smooth, undecorated sphere, lit from no source I could identify, cold enough that my breath should have shown and didn't. There was no choir representative waiting inside. There was no chair, no instrument, nothing to brace against, just the curve of the wall, and a silence so complete it had texture. The voice came from everywhere at once, the way it had on the bridge. "You will be measured," it said. "Stand and be measured." I stood. I want to say I felt brave. What I felt was the particular boredom of fear that has nowhere to go, the body readying itself for a fight that refuses to start. Minutes passed. Then the cold deepened, not gradually but in steps, like something was testing thresholds, and with each step the light dimmed, until I was standing in a sphere of absolute black, with nothing under my boots that I could feel. I learned later, from the choir elder who finally explained it to Oyeleran, that this was the entire rite. Not combat, not interrogation, cold and dark in time, stretched until something in the visitor cracked, fled inward, begged, broke. Every species they had tested, they said, eventually broke. That was the measurement. Not whether you survived it, whether, in the breaking, you turned on them, on yourselves, or simply stopped. I didn't know any of that while it was happening to me. All I knew was the cold, and the dark, and the small, stupid anchor I built for myself out of nothing. counting my own pulse, slow and steady, the only proof I had that I was still a person standing in a room, and not a wrong thought rattling around an empty shape. There was no floor I could feel, and no wall I could find by reaching, though I knew the sphere couldn't have been more than 4 meters across. I tried, twice, to walk toward where I thought the entrance had been, and both times, I lost count of my own steps somewhere around 20, which told me either the room was larger than physics allowed, or my mind had already started letting go of small certainties to protect the larger ones. I stopped walking. I stood instead, because standing was a thing I could still choose, and choosing was the last currency I had left. I thought about my daughter's face. I thought about Oya Laran's 11 minutes of argument, and decided I would not make her wrong for trusting me. I thought, oddly, about Varen's flat little observation that the choir meant us a test and not a harm, and I turned it over and over like a stone in a pocket, because believing it was the only thing standing between me and the part of my mind that wanted to scream simply to hear something other than silence. I did not pray, because I have never known how, but I held something the same shape as a prayer, and I did not let go of it. I don't know how long it lasted, long enough that when the light returned, it hurt like a wound. Long enough that my hands, when I looked at them, were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. The voice spoke once more, and for the first time, it did not sound like liturgy, it sounded almost uncertain. "You did not break," it said. "You did not turn outward, you did not turn inward, you held." I was returned to the Thistlewood with no ceremony, wrapped in a survival blanket by our medic, who kept asking me questions I couldn't answer yet. It was 3 hours before I could speak in full sentences. It was 3 days before the mark appeared, a fine branching discoloration along my left forearm, gray-white, painless, permanent. Our doctors ran every scan we had. They found nothing wrong with me, and could not explain how it had gotten there, only that it would not wash off, fade, or graft away. The choir, when asked, called it the witness mark. They said it plainly, the way you'd name a scar. They did not apologize for it, and they did not offer to remove it, because by their reckoning, there was nothing to remove. It was not a wound, it was a record. What followed was not a battle. There was no fleet, no exchange of fire, no moment of overwhelming human power that turned the tide, because there was no tide to turn. The choir met with Oya Laran the following day, and opened terms, trade corridors, an exchange of observers, the beginning of something that might, given years, become trust. They told her, through their elder, that every species who had undergone the rite before us had broken in one of 3 ways, and that they had begun to believe no species could do otherwise. They had not expected to be wrong. They said this without triumph and without apology, the way you'd report a fact you were still adjusting to. I carry the mark still. It hasn't spread, hasn't dimmed, hasn't ever hurt. Most days I forget it's there, until I catch it in poor light, a pale root system under my skin, proof of 3 hours I can't fully describe, and wouldn't trade back if I could. The choir consider it an honor that cannot be conferred twice, only earned, alone, in the dark, by someone willing to stand still and not turn into something smaller than themselves. The treaty holds. It is not warm. It is not the kind of peace that ends in parades. But it is real, built on the only thing the choir had ever found worth building on, and it cost exactly what it should have. Not a fleet, not a war. Just 1 quiet hour of a man standing in the cold, refusing to come apart. My daughter asked me once if I would do it again. I told her the truth. I would. And some nights I still feel the cold returning for no reason at all, and I let it pass through me the same way I did then, counting my pulse, holding the shape of something I still don't have a name for, until the room goes quiet, and I am, once again, still standing.